Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash at Scoop News Group, and we're here at the Age of Identity Public Sector Forum with James Yaeger, Vice President, Public Sector at Crowdstrike. James, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
So let me start by asking, how has the adoption of widespread remote work changed the approach to building and managing authentication strategies?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a lot to be said about what has changed, how much has changed now that we're all working more remotely, right? I mean, this kind of work from home, which has not been a new concept at CrowdStrike, we're actually more referring it to now as work from anywhere, right? Because we saw a lot of changes in behavior from an operational perspective and a professional kind of workplace environment perspective in the past 12 to 15 months. And I do think that it's highly probable that a lot of what we've seen recently will persist, right? I don't know that we'll see kind of the conventional, work day, work week, working within the same four walls. I don't know that we'll see that return anytime soon. But authentication is just one piece of this, right? The way I would kind of categorize it now is that maybe it's more of a necessary evil than it has been in the past. I mean, authentication is not a new technology principle. We all know that. But I think what we're seeing is that it's not a nice to have element of your kind of security and IT program. It's absolutely a must have. A lot has been talked about relative to the perimeter having, dissolved in front of our very eyes now, right? The kind of traditional network perimeter, edge, being kind of one part of your domain, and then, kind of having the core of your network, the inside, the guts of your infrastructure, if you will, the endpoints, the servers. Those lines are blurred now more than they ever have been in the past. And there's some new dynamics and some new complexities that exist when you have a mobile workforce. And so kind of adapting to kind of meet some of the needs and kind of technical idiosyncrasies that exist within these new kind of operational frameworks is a really important aspect of kind of transforming, your approach to kind of being a digital business or digital, organization. So authentication probably has moved from somewhat of just a one piece or maybe even an afterthought in some people's minds to a key ingredient, right? Because you've got to be able to match up the user, the persona and the activity that exists within the profile of that individual with the behavior and what you're witnessing in your infrastructure, and the kind of intersection between those two core technology principles. We've seen that kind of broken. We've seen that kind of fail us in some recent attacks, frankly. And so there's some heightened sensitivity around it. And I think it's long overdue. So I think it's a really good thing.
Well, let me ask a more expanded question around zero trust. And how much is zero trust really a mentality versus a set of technological goals?
Well, I do think it's both, or at least I should say that I believe that it needs to be both. Establishing clear goals in anything that we do, frankly, is always important. I think with goal setting, it's also important to kind of establish short-term and long-term objectives, right? It's not just about, I need to get to XYZ destination or get XYZ accomplished. I'm a firm believer that, kind of like defining your success criteria along your path and your journey to achieving your goals, kind of biting them up into some short-term chunks, things like this help you with progress monitoring, right? Kind of benchmarking, your path towards your goal. It also kind of helps with morale, right? Because if you set a big goal and you need everyone to kind of rally behind you, you need to make sure that they're in it to win it with you, that they're really in the boat, right? So, and I think that's where you see the mentality aspect of your question kind of come into play. you got to have that mental and emotional commitment to kind of get through these strategic initiatives, because you're going to get some resistance along the way. That resistance may come initially up front with people who don't entirely believe in the goal that you've got, or at least in your path towards the goal. There could be some short-term kind of growing pains, stubbing your toe a little bit as you're making some modifications, as you're kind of improvising a process or a new procedure. Productivity can be hampered when you think about things like zero trust and identity. You have to factor things in to the equation, like, what impact is this going to have on my user community? And that's why I mentioned the word like morale. So you have to be able to kind of persevere, and you have to be able to push through those things and truly believe that these goals are important. So that's why I think kind of the combination of it being a goal and like a set of ideals, but also the mindset.
Well, and to what extent do leaders need to get organizational buy-in before deploying zero trust technologies?
Well, I think it's critical. When I think of leadership, there needs to, we need to strike the right balance between, managing in a democratic way, versus kind of like, hey, we're doing this. And just to be perfectly clear, I don't use that word in a political or partisan sense. What I mean is that, we lead on behalf of people, right? And so people and their opinions and their feedback always needs to be factored in the decision-making process, at least in some capacity, and not necessarily to always, work towards achieving consensus, right? That can have issues as well, but really to kind of make sure that your people are heard, to make sure that you're not missing something. We can have so much confidence about a decision that we need to make that sometimes we're blinded by our own judgment or misjudgment. And also because we need the people of our organizations. We just talked about this a little bit in terms of the mentality. We need the people within our organizations to help us execute and take action. Otherwise we can make all the decisions in the world and absolutely nothing will get done because people aren't behind it. Now, the other side, because I mentioned, striking the right balance, is I'm a firm believer that, effective measures of leadership also require leaders to be decisive and to operate and act with conviction when you feel strongly about something, especially something that can be so impactful to an organization in such a dramatic way, and something that can have such a profound impact on an organization's ability to be productive or be more secure. So I would just say, let's talk about it, right? Let's articulate, why we're even having the discussion. Why are we here in the first place? How did we get here? Clearly, we're solving for a problem. What did that look like? What do we stand to lose if we don't pivot and make this adjustment and move in another direction? People just want to be informed, right? They need to know what that impact is. They need to understand and trust that we have done some discovery and kind of risk analysis, that we have a plan, and they want us to have a very sensible, pragmatic approach. And then once we've done that, those are all, by the way, more than fair expectations of people, within an organization. And so once we've met those rather basic expectations, then we go, right? We're moving out. We're doing it again with confidence and conviction, and we're not looking back. And we've met that kind of, obligation and responsibility that we have to the organization by not making decisions in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Well, next, and briefly, what are some key focus areas and benefits of establishing an effective identity management program?
Yeah, so I'd start by saying, it gives us more visibility or greater visibility, right? I talked earlier about, how the lines have become a little bit more gray between, the network side of the enterprise and the kind of host and endpoint side of the enterprise. The same can be said historically about a general lack of understanding and visibility when it comes to drawing conclusions about what you see in your environment relative to the behavior of an environment, right? The way systems are behaving, right? We're seeing anomalous behavior go on in our environment. If we're an operator, something, it looks different, it looks unique. It may not necessarily be bad right away, but we're seeing something. So that propels us to then investigate, to kind of double click and look a little bit further. On the other side, and that's something that typically exists in the security domain, right? And then on the IT side, you've got assets. It could be your laptop. It could be an asset that's really more virtualized because it's a service, like an application. And you're seeing behavior arise within that asset, or from that asset. And that's kind of the identity side. Organizations have really struggled to make the connection and define that kind of integration, that interoperability between true security-oriented behavior and the behavior of the persona. And so I think there's great opportunity for this to bridge the gap that sometimes exists between IT operations and security. That they'll have a better understanding about how complementary they are in this particular vector, and how much of a necessity it is that they share information. And having that broader spectrum of visibility is going to be good for the organization writ large, right? It's really going to up-level your ability to kind of make more informed decisions. There's some other aspects of this too. I think I mentioned earlier that there's potential danger or risk as it relates to short-term kind of growing pains when you roll out a new program like this, because there's always concern for uptime or availability, or is this going to have an impact to my user community? Once we get through that, and you can solve for some of that by having a very prescriptive plan and strategy for your program, but there's great opportunity for operational efficiencies, right? Especially as you look to kind of automating these things, right? We see something that's going on. I'm gonna oversimplify this example. I see something that doesn't look right to me. I can go, force an action in an automated fashion to have a multi-factor authentication process fire off within Okta, right? I mean, it no longer has to be I'm picking up the phone or I'm sending an email or I'm doing a ticket. Hey, can you look into this? So some of the automation that gets generated and established with kind of, bridging the gap between security and IT ops, and having identity be kind of that focal point in between, could do a lot to kind of create more efficiency and more speed within our IT and cyber operations. And ultimately that becomes a force multiplier for the entire program, because all we're trying to do, at least as it relates to security, is we're trying to meet and exceed the speed and innovation that the adversary has. That's always been an advantage that they have over us on the defensive side, is that they're more resourceful. They've got great determination, and they're very well motivated, right? So, and they've got all these kind of ingenious kind of methods and techniques that they use. And on the government side in particular, when you're talking about defending an enterprise, there's a lot of brick and mortar and kind of antiquity and that kind of technical residue that exists, that's decades old in some cases. And so I look at identity and things like zero trust as being a catalyst to help us kind of accelerate, into the new age.
Well, and lastly, and as a parting thought, will we ever get rid of passwords?
Doubtful, at least not any time soon. And I hate to be a pessimist there, because, let me just say, to that end, I hope I'm wrong. I truly do. I look, at this topic has been examined for decades, and it's a fair question, because we've witnessed how passwords, and more specifically, weak passwords, ineffective password management, ineffective password policies have kind of become the bane of our existence in many ways, especially when we're talking about security. I know that there's been a significant investment applied to security awareness training. That's something that I think that helps us. That's helped a little bit though, because even where we've seen some behavior of the user improve, we still have such a dependency for passwords in everything that we do when it comes to IT. And I think from a security perspective, the adversary knows that, and they're well informed too. And so time and time again, they're going to take advantage of the fact that as a community, we've not figured this out. You've also seen some developments and some innovation kind of driven into this space as well. Think about biometrics, right, as an example. And that's kind of a cool, development within the technology space. It's, certainly not new, but that's expensive. And, ultimately we haven't seen the level of adoption that many had hoped for when it comes to biometrics. So I think we can do it. I think the engineering side of the equation is not so difficult. It's not a massive technical lift, if you will, to have systems and applications no longer require passwords. This is equal parts technology, process, and people. So I guess let me just say that I think we're probably closer now than maybe we've been in the past. And as awful as this may sound to the listener, and listeners, if you've heard me talk before, you've heard me say this in the past, that with every major attack, with every major cyber crisis, there's some kind of wisdom that arises from our own failures. And so look at zero trust and look at the emphasis of identity and how much more increasingly we're talking about this topic. I mean, it's a rather younger technology principle. Zero trust is not necessarily identity, but you can see it's a prominent fixture in the recently publicized executive order, for example, right? So that's a good sign. Let's just see what happens. I think we've got an opportunity to absolve ourselves from our dependency on passwords, and there is hope on the horizon, but it's going to be a challenging thing to navigate through.
Well, James Yaeger, thank you so much for taking time to join us and share some of your insights on identity authentication and zero trust security.
Yeah, happy to have been here. Appreciate the time.